Welcome, everybody. All right, before we get started, I'm gonna try to make sure my live on Instagram works, okay, there it goes. All right, we're live. We're live everywhere. Thank you, everyone. Welcome to tonight's live stream. I think we're gonna have a lot of fun. I have a guest here, and we're gonna talk about his brand new book, and it's called "Does Christianity Still Make Sense?" I'm gonna show a picture of it to you guys right quick, so that y'all can go ahead and head on over to Amazon right now and order your copy of this book. Does Christianity Still Make Sense? Okay. The author is Dr. Bobby Conway, and I'm not even going to belabor the point anymore. I'm going to go ahead and bring him on. So there we are. Pastor Bobby Conway, how are you?
What's up, my friend? How you doing?
I'm doing good. I am just so excited about this conversation because I've seen you do this conversation on a lot of different channels. I know you were on Frank Turek, and I want to say Sean McDowell and Elisa Childers just talking about the new book. So there's so much to be said, and I just think it's really relevant for the day and age that we're living in. So I guess I'll start off with an easy question. And are there any easy questions here? I guess I would like to start off by asking you overall, like, what was the inspiration behind you writing this book?
Yeah, that question felt like it needed to be answered to me. And the question that I wanted to answer in writing the book was, does Christianity still make sense? And as you know, Ty, I went through a long, drawn out season of existential angst. I fell into a dark night of the soul where I found myself doubting the Christian faith in a deep kind of way. It wasn't making sense to me. I was struggling to understand some of the questions that I had that turned to doubt that were tormenting me, because all doubt entails questions, but not all questions entail doubt. And so I had questions that were blooming into full grown doubt. And these type of doubts that I was struggling with was causing me to feel unsteady. In fact, the word doubt comes from the Latin word dubitare. It means to be in two minds. It splits the mind, and so you don't feel solid, you don't feel focused, and it can create a tremendous amount of emotional torture for the believer. And as a result, I found myself on antidepressants, suicidal ideation, in counseling, and finally, God would bring me through this after several years. And so I feel like I went to the edge of apostasy without becoming an apostate. I was a near apostate, and it felt like I was hanging by a thread, and I hated my doubts. I did not want to have the doubts, but God ended up pulling me through that dark night of the soul. And what didn't make sense to me became a long, drawn out season of the making of an apologist, and also making sense of Christianity again. And I wanted to, several years later, this is my second book on doubt. I wrote one about 8 or 9 years ago called Doubting Toward Faith. But it's been almost a decade now, and God has still seemed to preserve me by his grace since that really difficult season. And I wanted to write that Christianity still makes sense in the midst of a culture, because I think it's the biggest apologetic question of our day, whether people can put it to those words or not, is, hey, does Christianity still make sense? That's what every doubter is asking. That's what every apostate came to conclude, no. And what I wanted to do is equip the church with a tool that could say, yes, it does, but here's the pathway to helping crystallize kind of some sense of maybe the questions that they have that have turned to doubt.
All right, that's good. And normally I don't ask questions from the audience as quickly, but since this is related to what you just said, can you explain for Ray, what does the term dark night of the soul mean? He says, isn't that a new age term?
Yeah, Ray. Not that I'm aware of. It could be used by New Age, but it's actually a term that is in reference to Saint John of the Cross, who was a Christian saint who talked about this whole concept of experiencing deep doubt, and he titled his book Dark Night of the Soul. And so it's this idea that, you know, as Christians, you can sink into a dark space where God feels hidden. You might feel forsaken. You might wonder where he's at. It's a season where Your confidence turns to confusion. What you were black and white on turns to gray. What seemed clear seems clouded, and it can be very, very challenging. And it's very prevalent in the Bible. Like you think of the different doubters club or people who are part of it in the Bible. It's replete with doubters. I mean, even John the Baptist, who was the cousin of Jesus, sends his disciples off with his doubts to go find out if Jesus is the Messiah. So, I mean, this is like something doubt. You have doubt. Thomas has a nickname, Doubting Thomas. The book of Jude says, be merciful to those who doubt. So doubt is a part of what it means at times for us in a scary place to struggle. And I think that there is a way that we can sincerely have doubts and hate our doubts, but we're just not capable of processing the questions that are coming our way, and we're inflicted. And then Jesus can tell the difference between the skeptical doubter and the sincere doubter. And I think with, Mary, for example, and you take Zechariah, when he found out about John the Baptist, he clearly had doubt, right? And he goes mute. Mary had more of a question. And so the question was answered.
I'm glad you bring that up, because I know, and we've had this conversation a few times before, but I guess there's this idea that if you have doubts and you're a Christian, that something is wrong with you. And so that's one of the things I appreciate about the book, is that it's like, it's okay if I have questions. And not only is it okay, but are there answers to those questions? And I think one of the reasons that people are doubting Christianity today, a lot of it has to do with this issue of church hurt. And I know on my channel, I've talked about it, I think from both aspects before, that, sometimes people say that they're church hurt just because they don't want to be held accountable. But some people really have been traumatized by church hurt, and it does cause them to leave the faith. So I know you have written a good portion of the book about this topic. So what is your experience with church hurt? How do you think pastors should address it? How do you think churches should address it? And how does this relate to whether or not Christianity is true?
So I do think there is such a thing as scandals in the church and hypocrisy in the church. But scandals and hypocrisy is not exclusively a Christian problem. Where you have humans, you'll have scandals. Where you have humans, you'll have hypocrisy. It's just more glaring in the church because of the standard that we're called to live by. Thankfully, the Bible is very aware of our scandals, and it's recognized as hypocrisy. Jesus came to die for our hypocrisy. He came to die on a cross for our scandals. So he is the solution, who also points out the problem that we have on our hands. And so even in the early church, you take the book of 1 Corinthians, for example, there were scandals there. You got a guy sleeping with his dad's wife. You've got people that are divided up over favoritism. They're just missing the mark. Their desires of spiritual gifts, and it's just a mess. They're getting inebriated on communion. Imagine that, coming together for the Lord's Supper, and then it turns into people overly imbibing. So I think that it's a real problem, and we see it today more clearly because of social media. News gets out a lot quicker, and people are extra exposed in this culture. And you think about, like, from the Hillsong or Bethel, Carl Lentz, who was at Hillsong and kind of pretending to be a sports agent while he's dating the Muslim, and James McDonald, and he's kind of potentially up with the lawsuit for getting angry at an elderly lady, and Bill Hybels with, just some of his not being careful with his sexual suggestions. It's just been replete in the church. Ravi Zacharias. And so it's created so much confusion. So I think what we need to do is we need to recognize that people are hurting, they're confused, but to point them beyond the person that hurt them, the leader, to the Savior that can help them through the difficult time, and to remember that Jesus is the one that we're looking to, not these leaders that fall. For example, it's been said before, if you hear somebody play Beethoven poorly, you don't blame Beethoven, you blame the person who played Beethoven poorly. So a lot of us play Jesus poorly at times, but it doesn't, discount Jesus. So, you wouldn't want to say something like this: if there's scandals and hypocrisy in the church, then Christianity isn't true. scandals and hypocrisy exist in the church, therefore Christianity isn't true. Premise one would be false, because the truthfulness of Christianity isn't established on whether or not there's scandals and hypocrisy. The truthfulness of Christianity is established on whether or not Jesus rose from the grave. And so that's why we have to keep our eyes on Jesus as our Savior in those moments.
Oh, that's excellent. And oh my goodness, the Ravi Zacharias thing. I'm not sure if all of y'all are familiar with who that is or what happened, but basically, he was one of the most well respected Christian apologists, probably in the last, I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 years. There's plenty of really, really good ones, but he was like super successful, huge platform. And it came out right, I think, right after he passed away, that he had been caught up in some really, really just egregious bad behavior. And it just seems like he never really fessed up to it. And so all these people who followed him for so many years are just like left with this idea of, did he do it? Like, what happened? What happened? It was just a mess. So, when those kind of things happen, it does kind of tend to push people away. And so I'm glad that you devoted a chapter in the book to that. Have you yourself experienced any personal like church hurt, and how has that affected your life as a Christian?
Yeah, Ty, I've been pretty open about my story. So, I got clean and sober at 21 years of age, became a Christian at 19. I wrestled for about a year and a half with alcohol, with multiple relapses, trying to get my life cleaned up. Becoming a Christian really messed up my drinking life. Like, I just felt extra terrible about it all. It's like, man, Lord, I want to live for you, but this is tough. I gotta crush this master. And so October 9th, 1994, I would go in to get clean, and spent over 400 meetings of recovery in my first year of sobriety at 21. I mean, I was just a kid looking back. And you fast forward 23 years, and there I was questioning whether or not maybe I was just young and dumb and could drink again. I was, leading a large growing church and doing a lot of Christian apologetics. I was working on my second doctorate degree at this time. We had two kids that were, around the high school time. Our daughter was recently out of high school. And I found myself in a dark night of depression. So the other feature would be like, a dark night of doubts, but this was just depression, right? It wasn't even necessarily related to my doubts as much as it was watching what was going on. Our son was going through a hard time with his own mental health stuff, with depression that he talks about. That was just tearing my heart up to watch him suffer. I was struggling, feeling ministry burnout. And so I thought, well, maybe I could have a drink or two a day to just assuage this angst, like everybody else that I see drinking around me. Maybe I could, have some self-control, because I demonstrated self-control in other areas of my life. So I went on a computer and I typed in, how much does a normal person drink? Not realizing that I'm already off to a bad start, because normal people don't type in how much does a normal person drink. I couldn't even hardly, just see the addict brain there. And it learned that, no more than 14 drinks in a week and no more than 4 in a night. And I thought, okay, great, I'll start there. And it was quickly turning to things like this, where I would think, okay, if I can have 4 drinks in a night. I was ordering drinks by what had the highest alcohol percentage, what would be the most amount of ounces. I found myself starting to sneak drinks on date nights and slip off to the bathroom at the restaurant and take a drink down. And I was like, something's just not right here. And they say with alcoholism, it kind of just picks up where you left off. Well, I couldn't manage this. It wasn't going well. And I didn't get inebriated or anything like that. It was just, I was overpouring. I was feeling it. And I knew that I was going to be in trouble if I stayed on that road. And so I ended up kind of pulling away and getting back in recovery, doing about 6 months of meetings. And then I just got triggered one weekend and ended up taking alcohol again. And a few days after that moment, I ended up totally inebriated, like just completely smashed. Um, I didn't even expect it to happen. It just totally just overtook me. So much so that at 2 a.m, you're passing out and you're waking up at 6 a.m. looking for the bottle to finish it off. And I thought, holy cow, this is sickness here. I went to the leadership team within about 5 days to a week or so. I don't remember the exact time. And it was just a very painful process from that point forward. The initial part was okay, but it just got where I just felt, I got very traumatized. Like, number one, I need to say, I believe that I sinned when I took the first sip. I do not deserve, I've lost the right to drink. I cannot mess with that. Right. So I was wrong. I shouldn't have drank. I think that I was hurting. It wasn't like I was just trying to drink and be this secretive guy. I was truly trying to cope with depression. They say in AA, if you got a gun in one hand and a bottle in the other, take the drink. Some could say, well, what about Jesus? And I would just say, sadly, he wasn't enough for me in that time. And I hate to say it. That's just being raw and vulnerable. I needed peace in some way. At least I believed that. It was really just felt like I was stretched to the utter core. And so I look back on that time and, go, man, Lord, you're always enough. I just believed you weren't in that moment. So that's on me. Drinking was on me. I know that I needed to address the church family at large, that they deserved an explanation. I was told that I was going to be a part of the entire process of sharing what happened with the church, but it didn't shake out like that. I had less than 1 hour where they brought me before an entire staff. Keep in mind, I'm a pastor of a large church. I mean, we could have 50 staff people, part-time and others, and they're sitting like in a classroom style. And here I am just, a week or so without a drink, totally devastated and shamed for my relapse. I'm trying my best to work through the craves of alcohol, everything that I'm feeling. And now I'm sitting before staff. I'm not clear-minded and I'm just sharing. And then right when that meeting's over with, two of the pastors are like, has he forever disqualified himself for ministry for the relapse? One pastor wouldn't meet with me. He said, because my sin, he says, I can't meet with you because of your sin. A leader's wife, when I went over to visit the pastor, the elder, she came home and she told me to leave her home, that I can't be at the house. Then when we were going to tell the church at large, then I was asked to text the elders on a daily basis that I hadn't drank. I was doing that. They wouldn't give a response. There was just ghosting kind of. So it was a very lonely, scary, isolated time when you're trying to stay clean. And then I'm told, well, we don't want you to leave. We don't want you to leave, but you got to share this with the body. So here I am out in Southern California, all the way across the country, dropping our daughter off, empty nesting her. And I said, and then I get 12 hours notice saying, we're going to announce it to the body tomorrow. I was like, well, you said I was going to be able to be a part of that. And no, I didn't have any time. And so I went ahead and resigned. No, I don't think you should resign, Bobby. Well, I'm resigning. I just felt totally unsafe. And then I said, but please let me get back so I can drop my daughter off. This is going to mess everything up for her. I need to be there for her. So they said, well, we'll get back with you. They never got back with me. Woke up the next morning. They announced the church. My phone's blowing up. They ended up saying, you are not to do any public response to this. And so then I had to stay silent for 6 weeks before I finally got to get before the body. And then when I did get before the body, I had to have my letter so edited down, and it had to be all about how they did everything right and I did everything wrong. And it was just, but I never would have saw this church that I pastored for a decade and a half had I not just complied. And it was painful all the way to just, you would never hear from most of them ever again, not saying goodbye to you when you leave the church. And you're thinking, man, that's so hard. So we left totally traumatized and felt canceled. And it was a very, very painful road to make our way back. And still to this day, it's unconscionable to me what took place for a guy. Cause it's like, I'm so thankful that the Lord carried me, because so many alcoholics could have just really went off the deep end. And it just showed that they had no understanding of addiction and how to deal with somebody in that place.
Well, thank you for your transparency on that. And Rashawn says the same. He says, I appreciate your
Um,
transparency. A lot of people be capping, which means they don't be keeping it, they
they,
don't be telling the
they
truth
became,
all the time.
yeah, that's a good, that's
Oh my
good. I
goodness.
like that phrase.
That was a good way to put it, Rashawn. Thank you, bro.
Yeah, yeah,
We've got some questions in the chat about
sure.
apologetics. They're like asking, what is the difference between apologetics and evangelism and all that? And I'll just give a brief definition. Apologetics is basically just defending the faith, and we base that on First Peter 3:15. I will hold the rest of that question to the end so that Pastor Bobby can elaborate on that. But I did want to ask you, why do you think that you were able to get out of that experience of doubt, even in the midst of church hurt and addiction and stuff? Because what we see a lot of times nowadays is you'll see people, whether they're pastors or parishioners or whatever, they'll completely leave Christianity, become a deconstructionist, or they'll still try to, maintain their platform, but sometimes change their theology or try to just brush what they did under the rug. How are you able to do that without compromising and, still able to keep trucking forward? I guess is basically what I'm trying to say. I think you get the heart
Yeah,
of my question.
I do. Yeah. So, even with the story I shared there, Ty, it's not that I, I just don't want this happening to people, and I feel like, in fairness to them, they saw me go through a lot. I was up and down. I wasn't healthy as a pastor with my doubt season and the relapse. I get it, right? They saw and there were times where during the doubt season or just some difficult parenting time, the marriage was hard. It was just a difficult season, but I genuinely look back on that and go, I did love the Lord, right? And we weren't just walking in blatant sin. We were just really hurting and struggling. And I think there's a lot of pastors out there sometimes that they hurt, they struggle, and they just need a compassionate community around them to just walk with them in those moments. And so, uh, I I would say to people, 95% of whatever you're going to hear about me from them is true, and I'll add to the list. I just think that the way that they handled me in this was really wrong and should have been acknowledged before the body. They wanted me to really get clean and get out about that, and it was like they didn't want the accountability of ever cleaning that up. And so that's what I'd wrap up that conversation on. With my doubts, Ty, you know, I really do feel like it's hard for me when I see people looking at the culture as it relates to things like maybe what people think about Jesus being the only way, or things like hell or the LGBT stuff. It really just didn't sit well with me to redefine the Bible to fit the culture. The Bible's clear. I mean, we're not progressing as a culture to someplace new. We're actually working toward devolving as a culture, like the Titanic that struck the iceberg, that we're sinking. And great nations that have collapsed look a lot like America does right now. There's lots of civil tensions. There's total promiscuity. There's a breakdown of the family. There's lack of trust in leadership. There's anarchy that's taking place. The types of things that we're seeing in our culture is the end of a culture as we once knew it. We're not being liberated. We're creating our own gallows that we're going to soon hang from. And the culture that the church was birthed out of was much like America today. The Greco-Roman world was highly pluralistic, polytheistic, highly sexualized. You had pederasty, man-boy lovers, sex goddess temples where you could go and pay sex prostitutes, cross-dressing. I mean, this was the world. You had Christians that were calling people up to live like Jesus, to a higher standard, laying out what the home's to look like, in Ephesians chapter 5. And Jesus is the only way to heaven. And that exclusive message did not sit well, and it got most of them martyred. But yet the church was growing in that way. What we're doing today is we're thinking that God's warmed up to pluralism because time's passed by. And so we're trying to give the Bible a facelift, God a facelift. And what we're doing is we're creating God in our own image. And I just feel like we need to make sure that we look at what the scriptures say, because at the end of the day, my feelings lie. And so what we're doing is we feel certain things about hell. We feel certain things about people getting to heaven. We feel certain things about people's sexual preferences. And we feel like because we feel these things, we get the Bible to try to submit to our feelings. But I believe we need to submit our feelings to the Bible. And when our feelings don't align with the Bible, we have to realize that that's some work for us to do in the sanctification department. That's some area that we need to pray through. That's some area that we need to grow in. And that's some area that we need to recognize how tight of a grip culture has on us, that we feel like the Bible's message is off and it needs an update. And so what I did is I felt like I can't sit as magistrate over the Bible. I'm a servant of it. And if I'm going to trust in Jesus, it means that I'm going to trust that his word knows what's best. And so I just started thinking through this stuff. And I started realizing that everybody that believes something believes what they believe and believe everybody else is wrong. And anybody that says all beliefs are the same, well, that can't be true because the beliefs contradict each other. God can't be and not be. He either is or he isn't. You can't say believe what you want to be. To the atheist, live your truth, and to the theist, live your truth, as if God is made into existence or non-existence because we believe it to be so. He either is or he isn't, whether we want him to be or not. So the way out of my horrific struggle of doubt was the resurrection, the linchpin of Christianity. I reasoned if Jesus really rose from the grave, he really did die. And if he really did die, he really did live. And when he really did live, he said he was going to die and rise again. He prophesied that. And when he lived, he also validated the trustworthiness of the Old Testament and said that he's going to send his spirit with more truth. And so I trust that in his first coming, if he validated the Old Testament, that in his second coming, he'll validate the process of the New Testament. So out of the resurrection, I could go backwards to his death, his life, his confirmation of the Old Testament, and forward to his second coming, and trusting that he'll validate what the New Testament process went through. And then the questions that emerge in the Bible, all I have to do is go to the resurrection for me. And I think if he rose from the grave and the questions I'm struggling with in the Old Testament are hard, well, they were good enough for him. Then if he rose from the grave, then guess what? I'm just going to trust him. And that's what I ended up doing.
That's good, because I notice that when I have conversations a lot of times with people who are non-Christians, it's like they don't even, the idea that Christianity or the resurrection could actually be true doesn't even really enter the conversation unless I bring it up. And that's something that was kind of new for me to even think to bring it up. Like, I'm trying to share the gospel, not that sharing the gospel is wrong, but, to kind of differentiate between evangelism and apologetics here, I think is where it can get a little bit dicey.
Yeah.
But sharing the gospel with someone is great. But if they say, well, that might be good, but how do I know that actually happened? Because to be fair, the resurrection is like kind of a hard pill to swallow in light of a world that just doesn't, most of us have never seen like that kind of a miracle. I mean, maybe finding $20 on the street is probably like the biggest. And even that, it's just like, yeah, right, I'm going to find $20, $100 or whatever, a briefcase full of money. So to think that a man could die and then rise from the dead is pretty, like, that's hard to believe. What evidence is there? Because I know you kind of get into this in the book as well. What evidence is there for the resurrection?
Well, okay. So for me, I tried to think about this. Like Paul says, if Jesus hasn't risen from the grave, then our faith is futile and we're still in our sins. In other words, if you can explain away the resurrection, you can explain away the gospel. If you can explain away the gospel, you can explain away Christianity. If you can explain away Christianity, you can explain away the Christ as we understand him today in the church, being that he is the Savior who died and rose again. So I thought about some of the different explanations that have been given to debunk the resurrection, like the swoon theory of the 19th century, the stolen body theory. So just take, for example, all of these theories. In the end, it would take way more faith for me to trust in the theories that tried to refute the resurrection than in the historical evidence for the resurrection. So here's what I mean. Like, why in the world would the disciples steal the body of Jesus and then go die for Jesus, saying he rose from the grave? Or if non-Christians stole the body of Jesus, then the moment that Christians started saying he rose from the grave, they would have brought the body to bear and say, these guys are, bogus. Here's the body. Or if, how in the world would Jesus have just passed out on the cross, like the swoon theory says? I mean, you're going to tell me he's going to have been whipped the way that he was, crucified to a cross, beaten silly, wrapped in 150 pounds of, burial ointments and garments, put inside of a tomb, and then that is going to be guarded, and it's going to be guarded, and it's going to be encased and closed with perhaps a 2-ton stone, which could weigh up to 4,000 pounds. You're going to have Roman guards sitting on the outside, and he's just going to basically unroll himself and then take a 4,000-pound stone and push it to the right or left, and then get past guards, and then go announce after his body's open and there was a sword pierced into his side, and he's going to say, I'm alive. I mean, he would have been a hot mess. So I'm like, that's the swoon theory, the stolen body theory, the hallucination theory. Well, he appeared on multiple occasions to multiple disciples, on one occasion to over 500 at once, Paul said at the time, of which many are still alive. In other words, the eyewitness evidence still walks the earth at the time he penned 1 Corinthians, probably from Ephesus in about AD 55, 56. So you think about that and you go, man, that doesn't make sense. His body was stolen, that people are hallucinating. I mean, I did a lot of hallucinating in my past, taking lots of LSD. In fact, we would take group hits. We would, sit in rooms, watch Pink Floyd The Wall or The Doors, and we would take massive bong hits. We would drink beer, smoke cigarettes, blow rings, and fry on LSD with journals in our hands as we sought to find ourselves, listening to Pink Floyd The Wall. And I'll tell you what, none of us had the same acid trip. We weren't having group hallucinations. And so I just don't buy it that 500 people and then all the multiple individual accounts would all align that they saw the resurrected Christ. The twin brother theory, one person came up with a theory that, Jesus had a twin brother that got separated from him at birth, who happened to be passing into Jerusalem and seeing Jesus on a cross. And he had been hearing about this Jesus, and he realized that that was his mirror image, as if he could tell his mirror image while he's hanging on a cross after the battering that he took. And so he went out and announced that he's alive. And so that comes a hoax. Well, I mean, it's just stupid. Like, as if the disciples wouldn't very quickly realize that this guy doesn't know what he's talking about when they start asking questions like, hey, you remember that time we had fish and chips? And the guy has a blank on his face. So I started thinking about all of this silly evidence. And then I thought about the evidence for the resurrection. For example, he appeared to women first, and women were the first eyewitnesses. Well, in the Greco-Roman world and even in the Jewish culture, women's votes and their voice was not considered valuable evidence. In fact, there's an old Jewish prayer, God, I thank you that I'm not a woman. It was said that it took 2 women votes to equal the vote of a man. So if you're making up the story, fabricating it, why in the world would you have women showing up as the first eyewitnesses? Well, the reason that you have women showing up as the first eyewitnesses is because the gospel writers are recording what they understood to have happened. So that's a good line of evidence. Or take Paul the Apostle. How do you explain what happened to him? I mean, he was on the road to Damascus with letters in hand to go and arrest Christians and put them in prison. And he encounters Jesus, and he's absolutely transformed from that moment and goes on to write, 13 books of the New Testament. And it's just incredible what happened to him. Or take the life change of the other disciples. They could hardly follow him during his earthly ministry, abandoning him on the night of his betrayal, but then most of them would go and die a martyr's death for him afterwards. Why? Because they saw the resurrected Messiah. How do you explain the church apart from the resurrection, the life change apart from the resurrection, women eyewitnesses? And not only that, you have nobody that was able to have the body show up. And he was buried in a well-known tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, who was a wealthy landowner. And it would have been very easy to go to that tomb. Nobody was able to bring forth the body. So to me, when I step back and I think about all that evidence, I'm thinking that's pretty convincing to me. And so then I think, is there anything else that I could think of? What else could I say to really explain this? And all of the lines of evidence are just so silly that I guess you could be left with, I'm just not going to believe that, though the evidence sounds great. I'm not going to believe that. And you can give accounts for, well, there's dying and rising gods, like in Mithraism and stuff like that, and other, religions. But I still think that we can pick that stuff apart pretty quick as well.
Wow, now that's what you call evidence. And again, for those of you who are just tuning in, we're talking to the author of the book, Does Christianity Still Make Sense? All right, does Christianity still make sense? If you like what you've heard thus far, first of all, give me a like and a subscription to this channel. And second of all, go to Amazon right now and get yourself and a friend a copy of this book. But okay, you said a lot in that last portion. And one of the things I kind of wanted to go into even more detail about is this idea of women in Christianity, because a lot of people have the idea that Christianity devalues women and that women can't do a lot of things and we're basically useless. How do you respond to that particular objection?
I do think that the Jews, and we're part of the legacy of Judaism. The Old Testament, Jesus is a Jew. He's born into the Jewish world. I do think that there were Jews that abused, what the Bible would have to say about women at times. I don't think that the Bible and I don't think God is oppressive to women, but I think that in the same way you've had Christians that call it toxic masculinity, that people want to say, is there such a thing as some toxic masculinity amongst Christian men, amongst men in general? Sure. Are all Christian men and are all men toxic in their masculinity? Absolutely not. Now, when it comes to the power grabs, unfortunately, you just get sinful men at times that have been abusive to women. But that's not the spirit of the Bible. The Bible sees us as created equal in God's image. God created them male and female in his image. Even in Galatians chapter 3, Paul says there's neither male nor female, neither slave nor free, neither Greek nor Gentile. So I had somebody that wanted to argue against the gender binary and say, okay, see, there's no gender binary, neither male nor female. And I said, that is just poor use of the scriptures. Paul's not writing to say that there's neither male nor female. He's the one who talked about male and female roles. You can just go over to 1 Peter 3 and Ephesians 5. Paul's not saying there's no ethnic distinction. He described himself as a Jew who felt called to reach the Gentiles. And he's not saying that there's no such thing as masters and slaves in the ancient culture. That was not just true. That was in the Greco-Roman world. It was all in the known world at that time. And so he even wrote Philemon to talk about this. So what he's saying is there's nothing that can get in the way of salvation for male, female, Jew, Gentile, master, slave. Like they're all equal in God's sight, equal worth. And so that's pretty beautiful. We look at Jesus' treatment of women, and he had a caravan of women that traveled with him. I think of the way that he would go and minister to women, like the woman at the well, or you think of the Syrophoenician women, or you think about the woman who, Mary Magdalene, and you think about the ointment that's poured over his feet. You just think about how he ministered and traveled with them, and how he took care of his mother from a cross, and how women were the first to see him. Is pretty powerful. And so I think that women have a real high place. I don't think that that excludes the idea of headship and submission, because that's also in the Bible. But headship doesn't mean more valuable. It just means more responsible. And submission, like in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 21, before it goes into the marriage verses in verse 22 down to 30. In verse 21, it talks about submitting to one another. So, I see that happening all the time in my marriage. Like, my wife said, hey, yeah. I just think when there's like maybe ultimate decisions to be made, the man is held accountable, but head doesn't mean dominant. It doesn't mean higher status. It doesn't mean more important, more valuable at all in that way. Not only that, the man is seen to have the call of ultimate submission. Or I say when I teach on that passage, like, wives, submit to your husbands, but then it says, husbands, love your wives as Christ did the church. Well, how did Christ love the church? He died for it. So I'll say, okay, ladies, what would you rather do? Submit or die, right? So death is ultimate submission and love for his bride. He's got to lay his life down. So that kind of love, when you're loving your wife like that, not dominating over, willing to give up your rights, willing to give up your ways, willing to serve your wife, willing to love her, willing to lean in, to live with her with understanding, to do everything you can to see that her dreams are fulfilled in life. Well, that just creates a responsiveness. That doesn't create a power struggle. So I don't think a true biblical picture of even submission and headship, when it's understood right, and I don't think, I just don't think when we look at that in the right lens, Ty, that we should see a negative picture of women. I think that the picture is beautiful, especially considering the surrounding context and the way that other world religions and worldviews perceived women. Christianity was much more advanced in that. And think about how women have been used throughout the church in great ways. But sadly, women have been oppressed. I mean, not having the right to vote, in America, I mean, till, almost 100 years ago, I think that's horrific. So there's been a lot of things where I do think that we need to recognize the wrongdoings that have happened, and we should not want to repeat some of the mistakes of the past.
Oh, that's such a great way to describe everything because I think we've kind of been taught, and I think culture adds to this. We've been taught to look at a lot of the things in the Bible as a negative instead of a positive. Because it's like even when you look at the Old Testament laws, all of these when the Bible says that the law was good and you think about the whole context, it's like this is good. God gave Moses these laws to protect people, to help them to flourish. But culture has taught us that all these things are bad, and it's just God wanting to keep things from you, and God wanting to make your life worse. And it's just like, no, he's trying to protect you. So I appreciate that breakdown of, when it says headship, it's not because your husband is better than you, or, a pastor is better than the flock. Like these people are there to help to make sure your life is better and protected and covered and all those things. So it's a gift.
Yeah,
So
Ty, you know what, too? And you think of it like this, like when it comes to a dance, if both people step first, you're just going to step on each other's toes, and marriage is supposed to be a dance and the husband is called to be the initiator. And it's like God just was trying to protect us from a power struggle. Hey, men, you have a tendency toward passivity. Initiate. You're going to be held accountable. You're responsible. And take that first step. But it's not like taking a first step and like when I take a first step, it's not like I'm stepping with my wife to push her into something of danger. It's we've committed to dance together. And in order to dance together, we both just recognize that, you know what? God's given me the call of being kind of the one that would initiate, but that doesn't mean that there's not lots of dances that she initiates on and she takes the first step and we work together. I mean, the whole idea of like, it's just culture picks out the most abusive examples. Like if you were talking to my wife right now, she would not say in the least that I'm dominant over her and that I'm trying to power anything. What she would say is that I just feel responsible to financially provide. Ultimately, I feel responsible to make sure that the family's got bread and food on the table, that the bills are paid, that I'm just that I'm committed to taking care of the home and the needs. But I care about her dreams. I care about what she wants to do. I ask her, does she have anything that she wants to feel more fulfilled in her life? How can I help her dreams come true? There's times where I get selfish and she says to me, you're being selfish. And I try to repent before the Lord for my selfishness. My job as a husband is to love my wife beautiful, to lay down my life for her. And it's like the picture that God has of a man it's the idea that, boy, you learn to just trust a man that just loves you so much that he would do anything for you. He's just crazy about you. And he's just so excited about just seeing you fulfilled in Christ that you wake up and you get excited about the direction that God's leading you guys together and initiating through your husband. It has nothing to do with me dominating or thinking I don't think I'm better. If anything, I think she's a lot better. I mean, it's like she's the hero of the household. So it's just, we have to be careful because our culture takes all these words that we have and then they taint them and they use the, just because somebody plays Beethoven badly doesn't mean that we need to write out Beethoven. Just because somebody abuses headship doesn't mean headship is wrong. Just because people have abused submission doesn't mean submission is wrong. We have to kind of go back and what does the Bible say? And our job's not to redefine the words and chuck the words out. Our job is to live out the words in a biblical way so that people can see what's beautiful. But instead, what we do is we chuck out headship, we check out submission, we check out the family, we check out male, female, and we just start taking on all the cultural baggage and then we update the Bible. And no wonder we're a mess right now.
Oh, wow. Now I'm wondering, have you ever written a book on marriage? I mean, this is a genuine question right now.
I haven't, but boy, I'll tell you what, it would be fun. And I'd like to do that with Heather because my wife and I, we actually traveled around the country, Ty, for 10 years almost. We spoke for a national international ministry called Family Life. And it was called Weekend to Remember. Maybe some listening right now have been to a Weekend to Remember marriage conference. Well, my wife and I used to do those. And, here's the other thing about our marriage. Our marriage is a love hard one. We have had many times where we both wanted to be in Tahiti and not with each other. We have struggled. We have been on our way to do marriage conferences and we're fighting like cats and dogs. And we're doing plenary sessions on communication. And here I can't even get my wife out of a car to go check in at the airport because I was speeding on the way to the airport to get there and I made her nervous. We have been a hot mess in many ways. So it's not like we have this perfect picture, but what we have is, what do you do without a gospel picture? Like, I'm so thankful, Ty. Like for me as a man, it's like husbands love your wife as Christ loved the church. Well, when I'm frustrated with my wife, thank God for that picture because I'm like, well, how did Jesus love me? And so I just remember the gospel and I picture my wife before a cross with a bleeding Savior that loves her so much that he purchased her. And I'm thinking, my goodness, Jesus paid for every one of her sins and I'm hung up on this one thing she did to me. I need to be forgiving. I need to be gracious. And so what has saved our marriage is the gospel. And God invites us to reenact the gospel in a marital covenant. And in that marital covenant, we're to depict forgiveness over and over and over again, and unconditional love and gospel grace to one another and sanctification. And here we are all these years later, and we have just forgiven each other so many thousands of times and not thrown in a towel. And man, I'll tell you what, it's been really, really challenging at times. And I've watched a lot of people give up on marriages for things a lot less challenging than we've been through. And I just want people to know that when God calls us to be salt and light, we need more stories in our culture of not throwing in the towel when life gets tough. We need more stories of people who bounce back after failures. And I think that God has taken her and myself, who are just utterly broken people, with a guy who had a relapse after 23 years, with a couple that's had our share of marital issues, with a guy that was wondering if he's going to be an apostate. But we just kept pushing through and pushing through. And right now we're living in the fruit of the promise of, let us not get tired of doing what is right. Galatians 6:9 says, for after a while, we will reap a harvest of blessing if we do not get discouraged and give up.
Every time you say, I'm just like, oh man, I need to be taking notes myself. I'm glad. I'm glad this is on YouTube and on record, so I can go back and listen to this again, because that's amazing advice when you said that Christ died for all of our sins. So why can we can't just hold one sin against someone when Christ paid for all that? That's beautiful. I hope all the ladies and gentlemen, whether you're married or single, are taking some notes, because this is really, really good stuff, Pastor Bobby. I do want to backtrack just a little bit before we go to Q&A. And we touched on this for a few seconds a little while ago, but this idea of homophobia in Christians. How do we as Christians stand up for the truth without compromising on love and compassion? Because the LGBT conversation is not going anywhere anytime soon. And there's a lot of them who love church, but they don't feel welcome in church. Some of them are going to more progressive churches. So, what are your thoughts on this whole progressive Christianity, and how Christians are to treat the LGBT community?
So first off, Ty, I just don't think we have the amount of homophobia that people say we do. Um, I think what we're having to do a lot, which is it's not fun. We're often on the defense as Christians, having to explain the abuse of terms that people give us. So headship is not this. So people say this is headship, this is submission, this is oppressive, this is homophobic, and you're having to step back, and it's because we're addicted to drama and social media, and people take the extremes and they post them, and we're having to just deal with that all the time, and it's exhausting. And so the same thing, like I've been a Christian for 30 years, Ty, and I don't think I've ever met a single Christian in 30 years who said, boy, we need to really get out and just hate the gay community and lambast them. In fact, it's just the over dominating narrative of how important it is that we show love to the homosexual community. That's what I've heard. I went to high school in Northern California, spent a lot of my life growing up in Southern California, an hour south of San Francisco. And there was way more homophobia in my high school as non-Christians than I ever have heard inside the church. And so I'm just saying, I think we've been love shamed, and homophobia is really amounts to this. If you don't celebrate my gay lifestyle, then you're a homophobe. Well, then that's not a fair definition of true homophobia. But that's how we've basically defined homophobia. You're a homophobic because you don't celebrate my lifestyle. And that's what we're reacting against. Okay, well, you're a Christian phobe because you don't celebrate me being a Christian. Like, why do we have to agree with one another? Or why do we have to celebrate each other on everything to love each other? We don't. That is the narrative that's being painted. So I think we're being love shamed. Do I think that there's been some abuse? 100%. I'm just saying that that's not been my experience, but I know there's been abuse. But by and large, not only are Christians bending over backwards to show that they're not homophobic, many Christians are going so far to show they're not homophobic that they're willing to compromise the Bible, and they're more concerned about making sure that that person loves them than making sure that they love God, who said, Jesus, if you love me, you'll obey my commandments. We're compromising the word of God to celebrate a narrative that we aren't allowed to do as Christians. And so why is it now that all of a sudden, just in the last few years here, we're going to say that we just got it wrong throughout church history on the whole idea of marriage? Do we really believe that, or have we been influenced by culture? Even non-believers know how to use the Bible against us. It's Christians that are trying to hang on to Jesus. They don't have the guts to completely walk away from the faith, so they want to warm up Jesus, hang on to Jesus, turn him into a cozy savior, and then reinterpret the Bible to make it palatable for culture. And we just don't have the right to do that. Like for me, I feel like I need to have the guts just to walk. If I get to a point where, look, I'm struggling with pluralism and I just don't believe in that, in heaven and hell anymore, and I believe it, that God got it wrong on gay marriage, I just need to walk away from Christianity and say, I just think the Bible's wrong. Just think it got it wrong. I think it's wrong, instead of just trying to say, well, here's another way to look at it. And everybody for the last 2,000 years in every single culture, except our little pocket, is finally discovering the truth of it while we're 2,000 years removed from church history. I think that's really naive and silly for us to even entertain those kind of arguments. People have been influenced by culture. It's the air they're breathing. We don't want to be rejected. We don't want to be called homophobes. We care more about what people think of us than what Jesus thinks of us. And we don't want to feel like we're homophobes. And I don't either. It really stinks, because here's the deal. I don't believe I am. I mean, I just don't. Like, there's a lot, like, you could, what does this say about, like, if there's a heterosexual couple, am I a sexophobe? Like, if they're having sex together, would I not go out to eat with a heterosexual couple that's having sex? Of course not. I go out to eat. Would I go out to, yeah, I hang out with, gay people all the time. My office is at Starbucks. They're my friends. They know I'm a pastor. I think about one person right now that I had dinner with a few months ago, who's a transvestite. I really love this individual. He knows that I differ. This has nothing to do with love. This is a worldview, and forcing us to look at things one way is wrong. I would never want to force the gay community to be Christians. I would never want to force my beliefs down the throat of anybody. I think that all these ideas should come to the table of ideas, and we should be on search of what's truth, and we should avoid ad hominem attacks that demonizes the person. And we should just say, guess what? At the end of the day, I could sit across from a gay couple. I could sit across from, somebody that's a porn addict. Somebody that's involved in porn video making. And I could love these people and be friends with these people and totally disagree with their lifestyle choices. And they could totally disagree with mine, but it doesn't mean I don't recognize their value, that God loves them, that God cares about them. And I believe that our call as Christians is we're not to force this down people's throat. They can take it or leave it. But what we're doing is we want them to take it so bad that now we're saying, okay, we know you won't take it the way it really is. Like, we know that you won't carry a cross and deny your sexual appetites because we made an idol into our sexuality. So what we'll do is we'll just say that it doesn't really matter, and we'll ask you to carry a non-splintered cross. Well, we all got to carry a cross. I got to carry a cross. There's times I would love to have a nice fifth of whiskey on a hard day and just get utterly inebriated. Still to this day. You said, that just seems crazy. Like you just said, yeah, I've said it. There are times when they're like, I am clean, and by and large, I don't want to drink, but there are days that I come home and go, man, a bottle of whiskey sounds fantastic right now. And I got to die to myself because that's not what I'm supposed to do. That's not a good road for me to go down. Right. There are times where other people look attractive in my life. Right. It's not like I took a pill and got married and it's like nobody else looks attractive to me. I have to guard my thoughts. I can't just go around and sleep with every woman that I think looks attractive to me. I have to die to myself. Right. And so we're all trying to die to ourselves. And so I feel like the narrative is so wrong, but we have to realize that we've been love shamed. So that's a long answer, but I think it's important.
No, that was good. And people are kind of saying this in the chat too. Like, other religions have similar views when it comes to homosexuality, like Islam, but typically Christians are the ones who get hit for saying that we don't affirm those types of sexual relationships as good or right, or, So, and it just makes me question, like, what is each person's boundary on what is acceptable sexually? Because I think everyone's got to have some kind of boundary. I mean, there's just so many different ways that you can have really like sinful behavior with your body parts. I think I heard you say in a sermon, people are obsessed with their genitals. It's like, there's
we have a genital obsession in our culture. We're just totally obsessed with our genitals. Yeah, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, so I'm like, as a Christian, as far as I believe, because I believe what the Bible says, that marriage is between one man and one woman. And so that's the only way that sex can be done without sinning. So, I mean, there's a lot of different options that someone could do outside of that. I think everyone has a no box. So why do Christians constantly get accused of being hateful just because we say, no, this is not right. This is not what that body part is for. So,
well, because we're pushovers, Ty. I think that no one, you're not going to do that to the Islamic community. They're tough as nails. But if somebody asks me a question about this stuff, I immediately bring other people on the hook. So I'll say, oh, well, did you know that, Muslims believe this as well? And so you just bring other people into the territory with you in your conversation. But, so you're dealing with an idea. This person says, it's okay. Okay, but what does it stop? Because you see it right now. What's happening in our culture is we have a sex addicted culture. We've turned our sexual appetites into our idols. And the reason people are demanding you celebrate them is because if you reduce your identity to your sexual preferences, If you don't celebrate what you perceive as your identity, then you feel threatened. But as Christians, we offer such a bigger identity to people. Yeah, we're sexual beings, but we're so much more than that. We're relational, we're emotional, we're intellectual, we're rational. We offer a bigger identity. We're moral than just sexuality. But because we're so obsessed with sex and sexuality and gender pronouns, you could never have a secure identity. I mean, picture these little kids, man. They're playing with dictionaries, reading through over 100 pronouns, trying to figure which pronoun they identify most with. Yet once you find, oh, I think it's this and this, well, by the time you're finished with that study, new pronouns have been introduced. It was hard enough to know our identity when we were just male and female. So you have so much going on, and now you have porn that has messed up people's prefrontal cortex where they have no impulse control. And so porn messes up the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for self-control. So now you got people going into marriage. They don't have an ability to stay self-controlled. And now they don't even think it's possible to stay faithful in their marriage because they're so driven by their sexual appetites. So now we're denying marriage as a category. And we're saying, well, let's just open it up and be polyamorous because that makes sense. And so what are we doing? Well, we're lowering the moral standard so that we don't feel guilty because we know we can't attain it anymore because we have so much addiction in our brain to sex. And so now we're like, let's just have sex with everyone. But think about what kind of parents that's going to produce. You're going to be having kids in this culture. Fast forward 20 years and you got a bunch of moms and dads that are swinging, having sex with everybody, playing with their genitals all the time while their kids are being raised by the government, and they have their safe spaces to color in their coloring books because they don't know how to deal with the trauma that's happened. And what kind of a world are we going to have? It's going to be a hot mess.
I think Frank Turek says, what does he say? Love doesn't require approval. And then he also says something that stuck with me. He said, most of the people that you love in your life, you are not going to have sex with. And I was like, that's, if they say that sex equals love, well, you love your best friends, you love your family members. You don't have to be in a physical relationship with someone to love them. So there's just so much to be said about this idea of homophobia in the church. I'm sure that there are professing Christians who have been, really mean and uncharitable and not been very compassionate. But I agree with you. I've seen Christians in my life, really try to not tweak their ideas on homosexuality, but really do the best that they can to show this person that I do love you. I want you in my life. I respect you. But at the same time, I have to say, what the Bible says. I have to agree with God on sexuality. He created it. As Christians, we have to. And I just wonder, when people are going to these progressive churches that say, no, God's fine with that. Where else? What kind of gospel? How is that freeing? What kind of gospel is that? To me, it just seems kind of null and void, because then what else is off the table? I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, I would say the compassion piece is there. I feel like I just shared with somebody. She's a total sweetheart, and she lives with another gal. She's a lesbian, and I just love this young lady. I mean, we get along wonderful. When I come in, she's always wanting to show me a new art piece she's working on, and I'll show her an art piece that I'm drawing. She'll show me the piano she's playing. We talk, and it's just, my heart goes out. I even see the way that she gets along with this girl that she's in a relationship, and her girlfriend's a sweetheart. I mean, they're just both really sweet girls, and I don't discount that they really love each other. I really don't, and it challenges me emotionally. Again, if it was up to me, I get it. I'll go there. I just don't trust in my own emotions. So if I trust in my own emotions, I'm going to start redefining the Bible on a lot of ways. And then at some point, it's just you're just going to jump into agnosticism. And I'm going, look, why is it that at one stage of my life, I felt these things were wrong and some things were right? I just don't buy that all the sex and all the drugs and all the freedom like this is doing us well, because I was blown up with consequences as a young man to drug use, alcoholism, sexual promiscuity with all the girls. it was so challenging. The lies I was trying to use to cover up the cheating that I was doing in the relationships, the lack of self-control that I had. I mean, it was just a mess in my life. And being a Christian and having a marriage where I've been a faithful husband has been so much more fulfilling, not living with the guilt, not living with the shame, not trying to cover up all the stuff, having self-control. When my wife, when I met her, we waited almost 2 years before we got married, and we didn't have sex. And it was really hard, but I believe God wanted to teach me self-control. And I think that why would God even want us to have sexual ethics? Because what if it's because he wants us to not have the guilt, not have the shame? He doesn't want us to have STDs. He wants us to have trust in each other. He doesn't want our marriage breaking apart. He wants us to feel secure together. And when we lead out of our sex drives, that breaks down the family. Because if you're Satan, what are you going to do? I'm going to get them totally addicted to sex, because if I can get them addicted to sex, then I can get them to break their marital covenant. If I get them to break their marital covenant, I can get their homes to fall apart. If I can get their homes to fall apart, I can get their kids depressed and get them filled with mental traumas and mental illnesses. And I can get the kids just so jacked up. And then I can raise up a generation that's been from divorced families, that they're totally been wounded, traumatized. And I can get them into a culture where they don't feel even secure getting married. And then therefore, I can have a world where you don't have the gospel shining in the home any longer. And I think that's kind of what the enemy's done. And so for me, I do feel emotionally for people that have same-sex attraction. I get that it's hard, but you are asking them to carry a cross in the same way that if something, was to happen to my wife and I was single, I doesn't mean I could just start having sex with whoever I want. Now, some could say, well, you could still get married again. That's true, but it doesn't. But there's other things in my life that I'm dying to. There's plenty of people that are gay that they can drink alcohol. They have freedoms that I don't. They can drink and enjoy it and not become alcoholics. I can't do that. That's my cross. So we all have these crosses, and if giving up our sex, I'll just put it to myself. Like if Jesus asked me to give up having sex for the rest of my life, if I lost my wife and be single to him, would I do that? Do I love him enough to do that? Well, I hope I would, right? I hope that he's more important than my sexual fulfillment. I hope that I could trust that he knows what's best for me. But instead, we're saying, God doesn't know what's best. And so therefore, let's kind of give people our plan instead of God's plan, and we compromise. And I think that we don't have the right to take the Bible in the name of our emotions and give people a Bible update.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Man, I wish I could ask you a dozen more questions because, oh my goodness, like you just shared so many good nuggets. I do have one more before we let the audience kind of ask you some questions and pick your brain. And I'm going to ask this because in the world of CRT and just overall critical theory and BLM and all these things, a lot of people criticize Christianity for, they'll call it the white man's religion, or say, I don't want to be a Christian because there's too many races in Christianity. And I mean, to be fair, American church history specifically is pretty bad when it comes to racism. But there's like some good spots, some really good things that we can look to in American church history and say, thank God those people fought for the abolition. But then on the flip side, you got some really really bad things that occurred. So how do you address the objection that Christianity is full of racist people?
Yeah. Well, I do think that there is certainly, racism in our culture, racism with some Christians, but that's a sin issue, right? But everybody's not a racist. I mean, that's just silly and that's CRT. It's critical race theory that is imposing that. I mean, for example, Ty, that about me, that I pastor a multicultural church, that I have a multicultural staff that's about half African American, half Caucasian, and God gave me a great burden to start a church after the George Floyd incident, And I wanted to make a difference in this. And, you know, sometimes you'll hear like God gives a missionary a burden for a certain culture, a certain country, and a missionary will go that way. Well, I mean, my burden is God has given me like just a massive heart for African Americans and African American people. I love them. I love doing life together. And our church isn't just a church that you have different types of multicultural church. Like, you have some churches will say, let's just swap, worship teams once a year and pulpits. And then everyone goes their separate ways. Or you have some cultures that are diverse, but then everybody hangs out in different spaces. Image Church, where I pastor, we do life together. I mean, we're in each other's homes. We're learning each other's stories, and I've learned so much from my African-American brothers and sisters. I mean, now I don't think that everybody is a racist, but I do think we all have blind spots. And I think African-Americans and white people, we have blind spots toward each other when we don't hang out with each other. And so by hanging out with each other, we can hear each other's perspectives. And there's times where I'm just going, wow, that is so good. I didn't see that. And boy, in the white culture where I've lived, this is the narrative. And, it's just amazing. And it's like the more that I do life with my African-American brothers and sisters, at first I was nervous to ask certain questions because I didn't want to come across the wrong way and it's like, I don't even feel like there's a wrong way I can come across now. We're just so close. And I get asked questions. Like I remember my friend Cheryl saying, so Bobby, do white people have family reunions? And I thought that was an interesting question. And then she said, do white people play church as kids? And I said, what do you mean by that? And she said, oh, Black people, we play church in our homes as kids. And so she started talking about that and just little things like that, where we get to know each other and some of the cultural things, or if I see something on the news, I'll offer my perspective. My buddies will offer their perspective, and it's just beautiful. I think what I would say is it's very healing to do life together. And to do life together, I knew that for me as a pastor, that I can't freak out and panic when people come into the church because and worry about where they are politically, white or Black. I have to let people be where they are, because people, when they come to church, they are where they are. And so we have to not expect them to change the moment they walk in the door just because they walk through the door. It takes pain and traumas and education and books that we've read and mentors we've had and school we've had and the home that raises us and our DNA, all that shapes us. And when people come through the church door, we have to have a lot of grace for each other. And that means that we have to listen to each other's perspectives and not demonize each other. And so like in our church, we'll probably have some Trump people, we'll probably have some Biden people, but it's really amazing to be a part of a church where I feel like we've created such a culture of love that we can give the benefit of the doubt to each other on things. And we're not trying to force politics down each other's throat. And we've had people that come and they're influenced by critical race theory. But you know what's amazing about that? Once I start just teaching the Bible and helping them to understand that, that whole oppressor-oppress model, that doesn't work biblically. Because all you do is just keep creating new oppressed groups. I mean, like if you overthrow one group and that group now is in charge, well, what are they? Well, now they're the new oppressors. Like it just doesn't work. It's a silly lens to look at everything through. Is there some systemic racism? Sure, there is. But is everything systemic in its racism? No. Is there still some racism in our culture? Of course there is. Is everything racist? No. Are there some bad cops? Sure. Do we need to defund all the police? Of course not. So I just feel like we go to these extremes, and when we sit down and we really start talking together, and that's the problem. We got to realize that what the news does, they're looking for drama, which means they're going to post the most dramatic stories because that's what gets views. Unfortunately, isn't it weird? Or fortunately, I live life, and maybe everybody else feels this too. It's like, where are all these rioters? They're out. There's some out there, but the way we would understand the world we live in, you'd think it's just complete Gotham everywhere. Well, it's not everywhere. It's just the news is addicted to showing us drama, and then it creates mental health issues in us, like anxiety, looking at the world. But thank God there's so many decent people out there.
Sorry, guys, my camera died, so you get fuzzy time. But
Fuzzy
no,
time.
I'm a little fuzzier than I was a few minutes ago, but it's okay. But no, that's really good. And I'm seeing some comments that I think people are like, I don't know, I'm feeling a little uncomfortable with some of this commentary, but we'll get to that in some of the question and answer. But again, I just wanted to remind everyone to grab a copy of this book. Does Christianity Still Make Sense? Go to Amazon right now and grab your copy. Okay, do that. And now I think we're just gonna go ahead first. I'll put me in.
Yeah, and throw up some of the stuff that where people feel uncomfortable, because this is my opportunity to maybe I got a blind spot. Give me throw your hottest hardballs at me right now, and let me see if I can repent. I mean, I'm totally open to it if I'm wrong.
All right. So Redefine says, I'm all for conversation and good debate, but he appears to be watering down his views on homosexuality.
Okay, that's I really don't know what I could say. I feel like I don't feel like I'm watering down the views. I feel like I could sharpen the sword of what the Bible would have to say about that. So I guess I would want to know, what do we mean by watering down? Like, am I watering down like in that I should be more accepting of it being in the Bible, or am I watering it down in that I'm not coming as strong against it because I'm recognizing that my feelings feel for people that struggle? So I would want clarification before I would answer that, so I could give her a fair answer. So on one side, I'd be like, yeah, you could sharpen the sword and talk about what the Bible says specifically, if that's the case. But I could also go the other way. So there's two ways I could read that question.
Yeah, I think you made a really good point about meeting people where they are in church, because I know my personal journey, and I've been a Christian since I was a little girl. But my theology, like, and oh my goodness, I've had so many different seasons of my life where I've just been up and down and up and down. And I thank God that there were people in my life who challenged me. So I've never walked away from the truth of the gospel or thinking like, no, the Bible, I can change it to whatever I want it to be. But I think, being influenced by people like you, Frank Turek, and other really good theologians in YouTube space, and, people at my church who've kind of been able to help me through some things, like, I am still a work in progress. And I think sometimes we are just so married to how we were brought up, what we were taught in church. And I think that can be good in some aspects, but I do also think, like, we have to remember we didn't come into this world knowing everything, and like sanctification and theology, all this stuff takes time and it takes work and study, failing sometimes. So, and I think
that's how you're right.
Yeah, go
in
ahead.
This culture, you're so right. I mean, I told my wife after I came home from work today, I said, it'd be tough to be in this culture. When I first became a Christian, the culture shared the values of the church by and large. So you go out and share the gospel and people understood what sin is. Well, today we've legalized our material that we call sin. So people are like, what's sin? So you start with sin, you're going to hit reaction. So it's like it changes the way you share the gospel. We have to learn about LGBT, critical race theory, critical theories, sociology, pluralism, secularism. I mean, and it can overwhelm us. And I get that. I mean, we really got to do our thinking, and it takes time. And I'm compassionate toward that. I do think when it comes to the LGBT stuff, for example, and in the Bible, Ty, I look at it like this. I would rather stand before the Lord someday and say, God, look, if I got it wrong in some of these parts of the Bible, I'm sorry. I mean, it could have been more clear. You only gave 6 verses in the Bible about homosexuality, and they were all painted in a negative light. If I was supposed to be totally for that, why couldn't there just been 1 verse? So because the Bible doesn't give me that, I give the benefit of the doubt before the Bible, and I'd say I'd rather stand before the Lord someday and say, God, I trusted all of your word, and then versus, okay, I took liberty and thought that this is what it was saying. It's like like books of the Bible that some people have problems with, or passages. I don't want to. I take all of it and trust it, because I don't want to feel like, okay, it's easier for me to envision standing before the Lord and go, I trusted all of it, instead of saying, well, I felt like I had the right to change it on this and this and that. I just feel like I can't do that. And I think we approach the Bible like going to TCBY yogurt. We just taste test it, and what tastes like culture, we order. What doesn't, we spit out. And I think deep down, if a lot of us are being honest, it's not that we don't see it in the Bible. We're just trying to find a way to still fit in. And the gospel is not about fitting in. The gospel is about standing out. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we're just basically, we're trying to go the same way as culture. And basically we're saying, and are we to really believe that Jesus didn't die for just sexual sins, heterosexual, homosexual alike? Is it all okay? Like, is that what we're to believe? Like, because man, we're not reading the same Bible. The Bible is replete with warnings of sexual consequences, just all hetero, and it's way more clear about what it has to say about heterosexual sex.
Yeah, because that was definitely a problem in that Corinthian church where
yes, absolutely.
The son with the father's wife, there was a lot of stuff going on. So neither one of us are saying that homosexuality is okay. I think what we're trying to communicate is that's not the gospel. Like, the gospel is about the death, burial, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. We should love people regardless of what their vice is, but also be honest with them about what the Bible says about that, whether it's homosexual sex or heterosexual sex. If it's not marriage between one man and one woman, it's wrong. But if you're like, we shouldn't use that conversation as an excuse to be mean to people or bash people or say, you can't sit here or you can't come to our church. Now, they can't have a microphone and preach. I think we could agree there. They should not be preaching or like leading a ministry, but let them come in and hear the gospel and have a conversation with them. I think that's as clear as I can say it. Do you have anything else to add on that?
No, I do. I think look, people might think we're weird for the belief, but it doesn't mean we hate them, right? Like Jehovah's Witnesses, they do some things that I don't believe and I don't resonate with, but it doesn't mean I can't like them as people. It doesn't mean that I can't be, friendly. It doesn't mean, I might not want to hang out with them because of some of the differences. That's fine. But just trying to coerce us to look at something one way, that's the beginning part of persecution. Mm-hmm. You start verbally, and then once the power gets in the right hands, and it's not hard to envision a culture down the road where the church is persecuted here in America. The handwriting's on the wall right now that if we don't prepare people, like I think you got two waves of apostasy. The first wave's happening before us right now. And that is when the culture no longer shares the values of the church and it's no longer cool to be a part of a church. Well, a lot of people have left, and you see that. Christianity no longer still makes sense. People have left. But once it starts getting more difficult and you have to pay a price to be a Christian, I think you're going to see another wave of apostasy. And I think what people are doing right now is they're in that place where people have left the church, and some people sticking around trying to keep it fitting in with the culture because they don't want to leave Jesus altogether. So what they want to do is modify him. And so you got the church is divided on this in some ways. You got people that are trying to update the Bible for the culture, and you got others trying to remain faithful. But what you're going to see is then the culture and even the progressive Christian church will turn against the traditional Christian church, and that will become a persecuted pocket. And those that are in that pocket that aren't legit because they don't want to be persecuted, they'll also abandon the faith. And then the church, it's not that the church is shrinking. The true church is growing and expanding. It's getting weeded out of people that genuinely don't want to carry the cross, and they want to dilute the gospel. And again, we can't do that.
Yeah. This isn't a question, but JP says, I know homosexuality is an act and not an identity, but so long as they see it as an identity, you have to address that first. I think that's, fair. Basically what he's getting at is because he said he has a friend at work who is a lesbian and he's trying to witness to her. So it's not like, you need to stop being gay and then come to church with me. Like, that's probably not going to be a great approach, so I think basically that's kind of the thing that we're getting at. But I guess we can go ahead and move on to the next question. I saw a really good one from Alexandria, here it is. Okay, Alexandria says, do you have any advice for Christians trying to navigate through doubts without doing it in an obsessive compulsive manner? I find this to be a struggle amongst many Christians.
Wow, Alexandria, that you nailed something. In my book, Doubting Toward Faith, which I wrote about 8 or 9 years ago, I talk about a type of person who I think gets hit hardest with doubts, and it's the obsessive analyzer. And the obsessive analyzer is a person that analyzes with OCD tendencies. So you could be obsessive, but you're not obsessing on analytical thought. You could be obsessive about, music. You could be an analyzer that loves analyzing data, but you know how to unlock. The obsessive analyzer and who also struggles with some anxious and anxiety in their kind of personal makeup, that person can get really jacked up by doubts. And that person was me. It is me. I'm a heavily analytical guy that is very, very obsessive. You're dealing with an addict brain that can just utterly tweak on information. And then I get anxious about the things that I'm reading and thinking. And how do you unlock from that then? And so I think one thing that we have to do is, because doubts can feel like whack-a-mole. You're just sitting there doing this. And my relationship with Christ started to feel like a lifelong Q&A session. And I'm like, it has to be more than that. Because every time I try to chase down the answer to one set of doubts, I just collected another set of doubts in reading more. And so how do you live with unanswered questions? How do you live without freaking out with doubts? And so that's really something important for us to figure out. I do think it's important to not reduce ourselves down to our thoughts. So sometimes Paul says in 2 Corinthians that we are to take every thought captive to make it obedient to Christ. Mm-hmm. So how do we take our thoughts captive? Well, it means we have to recognize our thoughts. So how do we recognize our thoughts? Well, we need to realize that we're not reduced down to our thoughts, right? Like Rene Descartes and his ergo cogito sum, I think, therefore I am. It reduces thinking, and what it means to be human down to our thinking, right? Like, no, more than my thinking. So what do I do? From myself, I observe my thinking. What is myself thinking about? And these thoughts are coming my way. And I have to be aware of the kind of thoughts that are coming my way. And I have to know that some of these thoughts, if I attach to them, I'm going to be like a hamster on a wheel, and I'm going to be in a bad loop. And so I have to know how to not always take the cheddar, right? It's like there's bait that can constantly take us down that road. And so for me, because of the resurrection and placing my faith in the gospel, when some of these thoughts come my way, instead of freaking out and panicking and going down that rabbit trail 100 times over, I remember that I'm committed to the gospel, which is the resurrection of Jesus, who died for my sins and rose again. And the questions that all that I have fold up into the gospel, and I trust him with those. And so faith like a child for me. And so I can then not take that cheese and every time, because can you imagine every time the cheese has God said is posed to you, now you wonder if Christianity is true again. Is Christianity true again? We're not supposed to sit every day. Wait, I read this book today. So is it, well, maybe it's wrong today, but it's right tomorrow. Like, what an exhausting way to live your life, right? Now, some would say, oh, you're just committing intellectual suicide because you believe. I don't believe I am. I spent ample time. I mean, I did 2 doctorate degrees, a 4-year master's degree. I taught myself to speed listen at double speed and triple speed, listening to hundreds and hundreds of books, many of the great Christian classics. Like, I don't think I'm scared of information. I just think there's no way that you could make it that I have to understand everything about everything before I could make an informed opinion on something. Thank God. If God exists, we have to believe that his existence would be revealed and he would offer a security to those that aren't even able to go pursue higher education. Like, we shouldn't think that only the intellectual elite could finally arrive at some security on what to believe about their existence. Thank God. If God's a good God, wouldn't we like to think that the non-intellectual could make an informed opinion? And so then Alvin Plantinga, in his work on a reformed epistemology, talks about this idea of warranted Christian belief. And he invites us on a thought scenario to imagine being convicted of a crime that you know you didn't commit. And there you sit in the room before the juror, and the evidence is stacked against you for this crime. And it looks like you're totally guilty, but you know in your heart you're innocent. Well, would you have the right to still believe in your innocence, even though you can't explain away all the evidence that says you're guilty? And Plantinga says, for the Christian, because of the assurance of the Holy Spirit, we might not have the answers to all the objections that come our way, but we can sit like the person, trusting in the innocence of the gospel, in the face of those who say that Christianity is guilty of being wrong, that we can trust in its truthfulness. And some would say, well, that's committing intellectual suicide. Well, so be it. You know what? I think plenty of atheists aren't willing to look outside of their atheism. And I think plenty of Mormons are not willing to look outside of their Mormons. But I know in my own life, in my own journey, that I can tell you what Mormons believe. I can tell you what Jehovah's Witnesses believe, and what atheists believe, and what New Agers believe, and what agnostics believe. I can talk to you about the different versions of atheism. I can talk to you about the different ways they try to ground morality, from emotionalism to atheistic moral Platonism to, methodological naturalism for an explanation of, fatalism and scientism. I mean, we can talk about this, but at the end of the day, for me, it goes back to that childlike faith.
You had me at listening to books on 3 times speed, because how on double speed? I'm like, wait, I got to go back. I got to go back. That's pretty impressive. Wow. Double speed, triple speed. Can y'all listen to a book that fast? My goodness. One thing I wanted to add, because, I love Frank Turek. I think he says something along the lines of, don't allow what you don't know to get you to doubt what you do know. And I think that's really good advice. Like, I don't have to have all of the information all of the time to make a sound, rational decision. But people who are extremely skeptical seem to think that you have to be absolutely sure without any doubt. And that's just not really fair to expect that out of any worldview. But from what I can tell, Christianity, like Greg Koukl says it all the time, Christianity just makes the most sense of why things are the way they are in the world. I totally agree with him on that.
Yeah. And you think about, like, again, doubt is not a Christian problem. It's a human problem. Mm-hmm. In the absence of certainty, there'll always be room for doubt. The question is, which worldview best closes the doubt gap? And so when you think pound for pound on things, I think that the Christianity leaves me with still lots of questions, but the case is closed tighter. On atheism, think about it. Many of them leverage methodological naturalism, MN. And methodological naturalism is their method for inquiry. And it's basically a method that doesn't leave room for the unseen realm. It's basically method is completely physical and material. So what does that mean then? To me, I think that it's more closed-minded than the Christian. The Christian's willing to follow the evidence where it leads, even if it means that you can trust in things of the unseen realm. Not only that, to be an atheist means that I have to deny every single answer to prayer, every single act of providence, every single religious experience, every single near-death experience, every single miracle that's ever taken place, every single special revelation that's supposedly given. You have to say everybody in human history, every one of those accounts was wrong. That seems like that takes in a tremendous amount of hubris to say you're all wrong, versus knowing that there are things atheism can explain, like how can nothing take something and make all this? If there's one thing we know about nothing, is it makes nothing. It can't make something. Not only that, how does atheism account for free will on method or on, natural selection, which is a deterministic machine that is just, we're predetermined to act according to natural selection. How does it explain consciousness, the immaterial soul? How does it explain things like objective morality? How do you count for what is objective morality? Something is objectively right or wrong, independent of what I think about it. So when we as Christians ground morality, we're saying it makes better sense to ground morality in an objective being named God than in the individual subjects that we call humans, because all you'd have is relativism, one subject's viewpoint against another. So we can ground up moral objectively in God. We can explain that someone and something took this and made this. We can explain free will because God created us with free will. We can explain near-death experiences because we have a soul. There's things that Christianity then better explains than atheism. And so that's what happens in my thinking. So don't just believe that, we're the ones that are irrational for belief. Press the atheist to explain this stuff. How does nothing it just seems like you're off to a bad start. How does nothing make something?
I actually had a debate on TikTok Live a few days ago with a very very adamant deconstructionist, and I asked him about like the beginning of the world. Like, I think he affirms the Big Bang, and I said, well, what started it? Well, I believe that space, time, and matter started it. I'm like, how? And he's like, well, energy can't be created nor destroyed. And honestly, I struggled with that. I didn't have a response. So now this is my personal question. Would you know how to respond to that? Or do I need to go check out some really long William Lane Craig videos to get an answer to that? How would you respond?
Well, all you're doing in that situation, like if you're going to say, oh, well, you have space, time, energy, and then what you're doing is you still have to push the question back. Well, then where did that come from? And what makes that ultimate? And how do you get from space and from time and energy, intelligence, like just some abstract primordial energy? And so like Lawrence Krauss, for example, in quantum theory, talks about, this vacuum, right? And you think about on a quantum level that you've got this vacuum that kind of spits out, the necessary things that would cause existence and for the Big Bang to eventually take place. Well, it's not really nothing, that vacuum. And you still have to answer, well, who created the quantum vacuum from which you get the energy and all of this to begin this race called, existence? How does all that come into being? Well, then Richard Dawkins in his book, The God Delusion, he shows his cards as a poor philosopher when he wants to go, well, then who created God? As if that's some big question. Leibniz, the great philosopher, said, why is there something rather than nothing, right? That's the most important explanation we're after. Why is there something instead of nothing? Well, if you were to say who created God, well, then you would ask the next question. Well, then who created that God? And then who created that God? And you're in an infinite regress. So what we would say is there has to be a necessary being. And that necessary being is not nothing. And so even if you're going to make the case that time, space, and energy is necessary, well, then you still got to ask, why does it necessarily exist? And, why would time necessarily exist? Wouldn't you arrive at a sense of what does it mean to say that time has necessarily exists? We would say that God has existed timelessly. Now, if you're A theory or B theory of time, one would say that God exists outside of time, and then now after creation, he exists in time. The other would say he continues to exist outside of time after time is created. But God is a necessary being, an uncaused cause of everything, the beginningless beginner that started everything. And so we are contingent beings. We derive our existence on God. All of the material realm derives its existence on God. And so to say that energy is your option. Okay, well then, are you going to say it's necessary energy? Okay, then I'm going to ask, how do we get mind from mindless energy? Like, what makes better sense? How do you get such fine tuning of the universe from mindless energy? Wouldn't it make better sense to just believe in a all-powerful, necessary, supremely knowledgeable being that we call God, that created mind, that created intelligence, that fine-tuned the universe in such a way that we exist and live in it? So atheists will go to great lengths to try not to concede God. They'll go to maybe an explanation like you just heard. Some would say that aliens seeded our planet. Well, where did the aliens come from? Others will say we just live in one universe amongst a multiverse, and the universe that we happen to live in just happens to be finely tuned, but there's millions of universes out there, and we just happen to be in one that looks designed. Okay, you just pushed the question and made it more complicated. Who then created the multiverse? So the problem is like, it just seems like it makes better sense to me to admit God. And I'm not even saying you have to admit Christianity. That's a whole other set of arguments. I mean, just say you believe in some kind of a being that at times we have a moral connection to, in the name of religious experiences that we confuse with all of our interpretations of what happened.
Well, actually, he did say, well, I do believe that maybe a God-like figure could exist. So maybe I'm more of an agnostic. I just don't believe in the Christian God. It's like, okay. Well, yeah.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah. But
so then our apologetic task starts at a different point then. Mm-hmm. So when we're doing apologetics, if you're dealing with a true atheist, we have to start trying to say, well, what better counts for existence? What best explains the existence, non-existence or existence, the existence of God or the existence of nothing? And so then we can start leveraging arguments for the existence of God, like the teleological, the ontological, the cosmological, the various versions of the moral argument, the argument from desire, argument from consciousness. We can get into all that. But then if somebody says, well, he says, well, I'm open to believing in God. Okay, well, we'll set aside the arguments. We've made a step. Now, if you're agnostic, as Norman Geisler said, well, what kind of agnostic are you? Are you an honorary agnostic or are you an open agnostic? Well, depending upon which one you are, that'll change the method. And then if you say, well, I believe in God, okay, well, then that's great. So which type of God do you believe in? And that will inform which type of an apologetic we get. If you're talking to a Muslim, well, let's pick up the New Testament and debate whether that's true.
Wow. Well, I'm going to let this be. Well, I got two short questions. I think you'll be able to answer these pretty quickly, and then we'll wrap it up tonight. But Melanie asked this at the beginning of the show. I'm not sure if she's still here, but thank you for submitting this question. She says, what's the difference between an apologist and an evangelist?
Yes. Well, it's been said before that evangelism and apologetics are like two wings of an airplane. So evangelism is the task of sharing our gospel that we believe in through our words and works. And apologetics is the task of defending the gospel through our words and works. And so it also comes with defending broader ideas outside the gospel, like the existence of God, the reliability of scriptures. It provides evidence for why we could believe in a good God in light of all the suffering and evil in the world. So basically, apologetics is the tool that the evangelist takes out the moment non-believers start asking him or her questions. And so it's the tool that we use to answer questions. And so that's how I got into apologetics. I was doing evangelism, which is sharing the gospel. And as I was sharing the gospel, people were asking me questions. So the person who says apologetics isn't important has just revealed how little evangelism he or she is doing. Because the moment we start doing evangelism, people will start asking us questions. And the moment we start answering questions, that's when we are doing apologetics. Mm-hmm. Apologetics is when we seek to provide a credible defense for the reliability of Christianity, the existence of God, and things like the gospel in light of the objections that are raised.
Awesome. All right. And the last question for tonight. We might have to invite you back on. Maybe we could talk about some
Let's
more
do
of
it.
the questions in the book that we didn't get
We
to
could do
last.
we could do different parts of it.
Yes. All right. We can schedule that. We'll schedule that offline. But is the book available on Logos? And again, the name of the book is Does Christianity Still Make Sense? Where can you get it? That beautiful.
So this book right here, a couple things is you can get this at Amazon. If you do get it and read it, if you'd be willing and to leave a review, that would mean so much. It also has a study guide that you can get. And I really feel like if you're parents, this can be really used because I'm dealing with the most current objections and I'm dealing with the most toughest objections throughout church history. And it's set up like it's a biography. It's an intellectual biography where I share my story and I go into the deep waters of doubt. And there's a lot of fast moving chapters, but the study guide you can use in small groups in your church. You can use in student groups, but moms and dads, you can use this with your kids to make sure you're getting them equipped before they go off into the world so that they know how to answer these questions. And then at Tyndale, if you go to Tyndale.com or TyndalePublishers.com, they flew my son and myself up and we did a video series where my son is a Gen Zer interviewed his old man. And we talked about the different doubts that Gen Zs and Gen Xers are facing. And so you see a father-son have a conversation. Again, this can be a great tool for families to go through together. And they're just 10-minute videos. And then you could talk about the questions that come up. So I really feel like I wrote this book and I even have a chapter at the end called A New Reformation, what it looks like moving forward. So I talk about doubt, the doubts we face, the problem that we experienced in the church, the apostasy happening, and then the best way forward. It's also available on Audible where I read it as the author. And so you can listen to it. So I really hope that it could be a tool that you can put in people's hands that are doubting Christianity, or you can put in people's hands that you want to equip to know how to defend the Christian faith. This is just that tool that you can put in your apologetic tool belt to help you in that way.
Yes. Okay. So you guys, please support this book. It's so important. Okay. I don't want to be the only apologist on this realm of YouTube. Okay. I have a lot of apologists who I look up to. And I know some of y'all might be looking up to me, but I want some of y'all to become apologists and start your own channels and start your own small groups and stuff like that at your church too. Right. So make sure you get your hands on that book. Leave a review, maybe grab a couple of copies, maybe give a copy to your pastor, and y'all can go through the study guides and the videos and all those things at your church. So,
and I'll come out and do a conference or a seminar in your church called Does Christianity Still Make Sense? And you can have me live answering questions. I'm happy to do that.
Oh, that would be amazing. Yeah. And tell us again, where are you a pastor?
Yeah, and you could go on the road with me, Ty. We could do it together. You could take some sessions.
Oh, that would be awesome. I could do a whole set on urban apologetics.
That would be amazing. Yep, that would be fun.
So what's the name of your church and what area are you in?
Yes, it's called imagechurch.live and we are in Charlotte, North Carolina. And you can hear my sermons as well. My podcast is Christianity Still Makes Sense. My YouTube channel is Christianity Still Makes Sense. And if you like the kind of Q&A stuff we're doing, I'm in the hot seat with my co-host, Brian Broderson, several days a week on national radio. It's called Pastor's Perspective. And people just call up and they ask us questions. And you can even see that on podcast or YouTube where, we're just answering questions from live audience. And so that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's one of the great things about Image Church too, because I don't think I had ever gone to a church that allowed you to ask some of those questions that you're not supposed to ask. So
yeah, it's fun doing that.
That's a really cool part of the thing at your church. So anyway, you guys, thank you so much for joining us. Pastor Bobby, thank you.
Thank you, sis. With you again, Ty.
Yeah, this book is amazing. Well, I haven't got my copy yet. I had a little financial thing. Someone in a whole different state decided to steal my credit card. And I had to hold off before.
Well, next time I see you, I got to give you a free copy. No problem.
Oh, that would be awesome. Okay. Well, and I'm still going to buy one because I just want to support you in the book. But anyway, you guys, y'all have a blessed night. We're going to go ahead and call it a night. And
good night, everybody.
Yes. And please give this video a like, a share, subscribe to my channel. I'm not sure when I'm going live again, but y'all just turn your notifications on. So when I go live, you'll know and you can join in. All right, you guys. Good night. Blessings, grace, and peace. Bye-bye.